Hello, friends. All of us, no matter our culture, beliefs, or the stories we tell ourselves about, life will one day stand before the quiet threshold that we call death. And when that moment arrives, we are confronted with a surprisingly simple yet profound question. What must be released and what must be held? Today, we journey into one of the world's most mysterious and spiritually sophisticated texts, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or Bardo Thodol. Through it, we will explore what awaits consciousness at the very first gate beyond physical death, the realm known as the Chikhai Bardo, the Bardo of the moment of death. If this exploration deepens the way you understand life, death, and the mind itself, consider subscribing and liking this channel. In the world of digital noise, your engagement is a small practice of awareness, a conscious choice to stay awake. One entering the first bardo, the moment of death. According to Tibetan Buddhism, death unfolds, not as a single plunge into darkness, but as a process, a sequence of inner events that reveal the nature of mind itself. The first stage in this process is the Chikhai Bardo, the bardo of the moment of death. In this stage, as the physical body shuts down and the senses dissolve, consciousness becomes separated from the machinery of flesh. The text describes this as a moment of extraordinary clarity, a flash in which every being encounters the clear light, a radiant brilliance that is nothing other than the true nature of mind. In Western philosophy, this moment might be compared to Plato's idea of turning the soul toward the realm of forms, or to Meister Eckhart's description of the soul, encountering its own ground within God. But in the Tibetan tradition, the message is even more direct. This light is your own original nature. Recognize it and you are liberated instantly. Yet, in the vast majority of cases, people fail to recognize this brilliance. They turn away not because the light is frightening, but because truth is frightening. The ego, sensing its dissolution, recoils. The familiar identity, our lifelong story of me, begins to crumble. And it is that, the collapse of the self, that generates the terror described in the text. 2. The great obstacles: fear, attachment, and confusion. The Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches that three forces prevent most souls from recognizing the clear light. Fear, the dread of losing the self. Attachment, the desperate grasping at identity and relationships. Confusion, the disorientation that arises when habitual perceptions disappear. These are not merely religious symbols. They are universal psychological reactions to the breakdown of the ego. To understand the bardo is to understand ourselves, because these same forces operate in everyday struggles, anxieties, and moral failures. Let us explore each one more deeply, beginning with attachment, the most emphasized within the text. 3. What is attachment? The illusion of I holding on to itself. Attachment in the context of the bardo is the soul's desperate clinging to the illusion of a fixed identity. In life, we cling to countless forms of self. The self who has a family, the self who has a body, the self who has a reputation, the self who wants to win, the self who fears being forgotten. But at the moment of death, each of these masks is stripped away. The ego panics because it senses something more terrifying than pain, the possibility that I might not be what I always thought I was. The Tibetan text describes how consciousness, newly freed from the body, still tries to cling to what it knew in life. Examples include attachment to the physical body. The soul hovers near its own corpse, unable to accept that breathing has stopped. Attachment to family. It drifts around loved ones, drawn by their grief, unable to let go of emotional bonds forged through decades. Attachment to emotions. Lingering anger, resentment, longing, or unfulfilled desires. can pull the soul toward darker, denser realms, away from the clear light, attachment to status and power. A former leader may still think, I am the president, I am the successful one, I am the one people must obey. Even after death, the ego continues its charade. These examples illustrate a central principle. Attachment is not love. Attachment is the fear of losing what we believe defines us. This fear blinds us to the clear light, the very thing that could set us free. 4. The psychological insight behind the Bardo. From a Western psychological standpoint, this phase of the Bardo mirrors what Carl Jung called the confrontation with the unconscious. When the ego dissolves, all repressed instincts, unresolved emotions, and hidden desires surface. These forces can obscure awareness, generate terrifying hallucinations, or pull consciousness into lower fragmented states. But the Tibetan sages insist, all these visions, beautiful or terrifying, are projections of your own mind. The Bardo is not a place. It is a mirror, and the first thing it reflects is the raw, unfiltered state of your own psyche. 5. The meaning of 3 illusions. The deeper sense of Samga Senjia. In Korean funerals, people often say, 삼가 고인의 명복을 빕니다, a phrase that is usually interpreted as a polite expression of condolence. But the ancient Buddhist meaning is far deeper. Samga Sanjay refers to 3 illusions, 3 forms of falseness, or impermanence that all beings must transcend to awaken. On, Mingjia Myunga, the illusion of name, the belief that our identity, our name, reputation, social label has inherent reality. San, Fajia Biopga, the illusion of form or phenomena, the belief that the world, with its roles, structures, and physical objects, is solid and permanent. Than Shujasuga, the illusion of sensation, the belief that our feelings, likes and dislikes, joys and sorrows, are lasting and define who we are. In the Bardo, all 3 illusions are stripped away, not out of cruelty, but because liberation is impossible while clinging to what was always temporary. So when someone says, 삼가 고인의 명복을 빕니다, the deeper meaning is, may the departed release the illusions of name, form, and sensation, and return to their true nature. In this sense, death is not the end. It is the final invitation to awakening, what the Tibetans call the last great insight, 最后之觉悟. 6. The final teaching of the Bardo, death as the last chance to wake up. The Tibetan Book of the Dead insists that death is not a failure. It is an opportunity, perhaps the greatest of all. When the body falls silent, when the stories of one's life fade, what remains is the raw brilliance of consciousness itself. The Chikhai Bardo is the moment when there is nothing left to defend, nothing left to accomplish, nothing left to fear. The ego dies, but awareness does not. And in that instant, liberation is possible for anyone, not because they lived a perfect life, but because the nature of mind has always been pure. The tragedy is simply that most souls turn away. They prefer the familiar darkness of ego to the unknown radiance of truth. But the text assures us, even if one fails in this moment, other opportunities follow. The journey continues. The wisdom of the Chikhai Bardo is not only for the dying, it is for the living. Every moment in life where the ego resists change, where we cling to the past, where we fear losing control, these are small rehearsals for death. And in each of these moments, we can practice letting go. To recognize the clear light after death, we must first learn to recognize clarity within life. So as we continue exploring the Bardos, these hidden terrains of consciousness, I invite you to stay connected. If this journey has opened a new doorway in your thinking, consider subscribing and tapping the like button. Together, we can cultivate a deeper understanding of the mind, the soul, and the mysterious frontier that awaits us all. The Bardo teachings say, awareness is the only companion you carry beyond death. Let us strengthen that awareness now, while we still breathe. When Tibetan Buddhism speaks of three illusions, the three, Ga Sanjia, it is not offering abstract doctrine or distant metaphysical speculation. It is describing what consciousness encounters when it stands naked before the threshold of death. These three illusions, the illusion of name, Mingjia, the illusion of law or knowledge, Fajia, and the illusion of experience or possession, Shojia, are unveiled, not as moral lectures, but as mirrors. Each mirror shows us the fragile architecture of the identity we cling to during life, and the quiet truth that emerges when all that scaffolding falls away. Let us walk through these three mirrors one by one. 1. Name is an illusion. Mingjia Minga. In life, we are wrapped in names. Some are given by our parents. Others are earned, crafted, or defended through years of effort. Titles, reputations, credentials, and the subtle image we hold of ourselves. Yet Buddhism teaches that a name is nothing more than a temporary label, a practical fiction adopted for the sake of communication. It is a provisional marker, not an essence. Your name, your title, your social standing, these appear solid from the outside. But spiritually speaking, they are no more real than a shadow suspended in mid-air. The ancient metaphor of Kongjong, Zhuying, a reflection floating in the sky. A shadow that looks real, yet vanishes the moment light changes. This metaphor conveys a profound insight. Everything we believe to be stable about ourselves, our successes, our failures, our beauty, our status is contingent upon circumstances, constantly shifting beneath our feet. None of them possess intrinsic or permanent reality. At the moment of death, the soul must peel off this layer first. The spiritual traveler cannot cross the threshold, while still gripping the question, who am I supposed to be? In the teachings of the Bardo Thodol, the illusion of name whispers. The self you clung to was only an echo in the wind. Let it fade, and your original face, your true nature, will appear. For Western ears, this may echo themes found in Stoicism, Christian mysticism, and even existentialism. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that fame is a noise made by others. Meister Eckhart teaches that the soul finds God only when it empties itself of its false identities. And existential philosophers warn that identity becomes a trap when confused with its public mask. In this sense, Minga is not foreign at all. It is a universal invitation to step out of the costume of the ego. 2. Law, doctrine, and knowledge are illusions. Fa Jia Biopga. The second illusion concerns something Western culture often reveres: knowledge, belief, ethics, and the intellectual structures we build to understand the world. In Buddhism, Fa Dharma, or law, refers to all conceptual systems, moral rules, scientific theories, philosophical doctrines, and religious teachings. These are valuable guides during life, but in the Bardo they reveal their temporary, conditional nature. They are not ultimate truth. They are maps, not the territory, frameworks that help the living navigate reality, but dissolve the moment consciousness is separated from the physical body. In the face of death, all learning becomes like a sandcastle Shacheng complex, admirable yet undone by the first wave. And so Biopga asks, the truths you relied on, do they remain true at the threshold of death? This is not a dismissal of knowledge. It is an invitation to humility. In Western philosophy, this resonates deeply with Søren Kierkegaard, who argued that truth is never merely intellectual but always existential. It aligns with Heidegger's view. That authenticity emerges only when the self confronts its finitude. Even Saint Paul writes, knowledge will pass away. The mystics of many traditions insist that ultimate truth cannot be grasped by concepts, only by transformation of the heart. The Bardo Thodol teaches that at the moment of death, consciousness must let go not only of ignorance, but also of certainty, because genuine awakening is not the accumulation of answers, it is the surrendering of them. To die is to release the very frameworks with which we once tried to understand life. It is not that knowledge was useless, it served its purpose, but now the traveler must walk without it. 3. Experience, possession, and emotion are illusions, shojia suga. The third illusion is perhaps the most intimate. Shushusu refers to all that we receive. Our sensations, our relationships, our wealth, our pleasures, our memories, our emotional attachments. We spend our entire lives trying to accumulate these. The warmth of family, the comfort of home, the pride of achievement, the sweetness and bitterness of love. But according to the Bardo, every one of these is like a bubble on water, Pao Ying glittering for a moment, then bursting into nothing. At the moment of death, the soul tries desperately to hold on. My family needs me. My possessions are still mine. My story isn't over yet. But Suga whispers, what you clutch is only sand. Only when you release it can you become free. Here again, Western traditions echo the same truth. Christianity teaches that your treasure cannot follow you. Stoicism reminds us that everything external is borrowed, never owned. Psychology describes attachment as both necessary and ultimately transient. Even neuroscience teaches that every emotion is fleeting. Electrical activity never permanent. The Bardo tells us that the final test of consciousness is whether it can release these emotional bonds without collapsing into fear. To the extent that we resist, we fall into confusion, driven by longing and aversion. But to the extent that we let go, we return to what Buddhist philosophy calls the Dharmakaya, the body of truth, the luminous field of pure awareness. This is not annihilation. It is return, the meaning of the three illusions, Sanjia. When taken together, these teachings do not deny the value of life. They illuminate it. The three illusions whisper, your name is not your essence. Your knowledge is not the absolute. Your possessions are not yourself. These insights are not meant to diminish life's meaning, but to reveal where its real meaning lies. For if what is false falls away at death, then what remains must be what is true. And what is that truth? It is the consciousness that sees, the awareness that persists, the luminous ground of being that Buddhism calls the clear light, that Christianity describes as the uncreated light, and that philosophy seeks under names like being, spirit, or the self beyond ego. The three illusions are not punishments. They are gateways. They are the gentle dismantling of everything that is not truly you. And through them, the traveler discovers that what they feared, losing, was never theirs, and what they feared was absent had always been within them. The third teaching beyond, named beyond knowledge, beyond possession. In the Tibetan tradition, the three illusions, name, law, and reception, lead us to their natural conclusion. If each layer of identity eventually falls away, what remains? The ancient masters answer with disarming simplicity. Cast away the name. Qiming, cast away the law. Qifa, cast away the possessions received. Qishou. This triple renunciation is not a rejection of life, but an unveiling of truth. Only when these three shells fall off does consciousness stand before what Tibetan Buddhism calls Yijin Fa Jie, Iljin Biop Gia, the one true realm, the singular, undivided reality underlying all experience. This realm is described as light that is empty, yet overflowing, a luminous clarity known as Bongagjigwangmyong, the light of original awareness. It is the radiance of our inherent wisdom, the wisdom we never gained because we never lacked it. The symbol of the shroud without pockets. This is why, in many Asian cultures, the burial garment, the suyi, the final robe worn in death, has no pockets, not because it is impractical, but because it is philosophical. On the final journey, nothing from the earthly world can be carried forward. No coin, no medal, no ring, no token of glory. Not even the notes of farewell some families try to slip inside. The shroud without pockets is a spiritual proclamation. You take nothing with you. You never truly owned any of it. And yet, this is not a bleak message. Rather, it is an invitation to liberation. In life, we clench endlessly. Money, reputation, affection, knowledge, titles, roles. We mistake these for the foundations of our being. We cling to them not because they are real, but because they are familiar. Yet in the presence of death, these grasped things dissolve. The hands that once held tightly become empty. The name, the wealth, the relationships, the achievements, all reveal themselves as shoji, temporary reflections borrowed for a moment. Thus, the robe with no pockets becomes a silent teacher. Carry nothing, for only empty hands can open the final door. When everything is released, not through force, not through denial, but through necessity, the mind does not fall into poverty, it falls into clarity. In the space once occupied by attachments, the light of Dharmakaya, the body of truth, begins to shine. The shrouds whisper, a message of freedom. The pocketless shroud whispers, do not carry the world into the next. Only by emptying yourself will the true gate appear. And in that moment, the soul becomes weightless. No longer bound by unfinished desires, unspoken words, or worldly regrets, it steps toward the threshold of liberation, heital, moksha, release. The shroud is not a symbol of deprivation, it is a symbol of victory. Because one who carries nothing has nothing left to lose, and one who has nothing to lose becomes one with everything. The first stage of death, Chikhai Bardo. According to the Bardo Thodol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the journey of death unfolds through stages. And the first is called Chikhai Bardo, the bardo of the moment of death. At this stage, the body's functions cease. Breath stops. Sensation fades. The boundary between inner and outer dissolves. And then, in a flash far shorter than thought, consciousness is confronted with the pure light, the unmasked radiance of its own true nature. This is not a light shining upon the soul. It is the light shining from within the soul. Mystical Christian traditions recognize this as the uncreated light. Sufi mystics call it the light of the real. Philosophers have spoken of it as the ground of being. Neuroscientists might call it the brain's final dissolution into a state beyond perception. But regardless of language, the encounter is universal. Yet, and this is the tragedy of the human condition, the soul often recoils, not from evil, but from too much truth, not from darkness, but from blinding clarity. If the soul is unprepared, the light appears overwhelming, too vast, too intimate, too unfiltered. A lifetime of distraction makes the true nature of consciousness feel alien, even frightening. In that instant of hesitation, the soul turns away, missing the doorway to immediate liberation. The darkness of confusion. The Bardo Thodol calls this recoil the darkness of confusion. It is not confusion as we normally think of it, but the collapse of all familiar reference points. Time no longer moves. Space has no direction. The senses no longer anchor reality. And the soul, newly separated from the body, does not yet understand its own condition. It clings to memory and habit, trying to reconstruct something stable. The text describes this moment as the time when consciousness forgets its own nature and is swept away by illusion. The soul may not even realize it has died. Instead, it drifts through visions woven from its own mind. Dreams, fears, desires, regrets. These appear as dazzling lights, frightening deities, unfamiliar voices. To the soul, they feel external, foreign, threatening. But the text makes this clear. These apparitions are not beings from outside. They are projections of one's own karma, one's own inner landscape, cast outward in the absence of physical form. Yet, unaware of this, the soul trembles. Who is coming to judge me? Where am I? What is happening? Thus fear grows. This is why the teachings insist that liberation requires recognition. Not faith, not effort, recognition. Recognition that the light is one's own light. Recognition that the visions are one's own mind. Recognition that nothing external is pursuing the soul, except the shadows it once carried. The purpose of the teachings. The teachings of the three illusions prepare the soul precisely for this moment. By teaching us to release name, knowledge, and possession while alive, we learn not to panic when they fall away in death. A person who has practiced release does not fear the light. A person who has questioned the solidity of the ego does not fear its dissolution. A person who has learned to see experience as transient recognizes illusions as illusions. Thus, renunciation is not loss. It is training. It teaches us how to meet death with open eyes, empty hands, and an unburdened heart. Because the greatest tragedy is not death. It is mistaking our own radiance for something frightening. And the greatest liberation is not escape. It is awakening to what has always been true. This, precisely, is what the Tibetan tradition calls confusion. It is the moment when consciousness loses the memory of its true nature, what Buddhist philosophy describes as Buddha nature, and instead clings to the world of illusions it itself has produced. Confusion is not merely a cognitive error, it is an existential fog, a spiritual disorientation in which the mind mistakes its own projections for reality. In this state, the soul no longer recognizes what is eternal within itself, and becomes frightened by the very freedom it encounters. Fear, in this framework, is not an external force. It is the shadow cast by our own attachments. Every desire we fail to let go of, every idea we cling to, every fragment of identity. We refuse to release these shape the ghosts that greet us at death. Fear arises when the self, accustomed to certainty and form, is confronted with the boundless openness of what it truly is. Ultimately, the fear the soul experiences at the threshold of death is a fear of dissolving into nothing. It is the panic that arises when the ego senses that its boundaries are collapsing. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes this fear as the final instinctive rebellion against the dissolution of the self. In other words, the ego constructed over a lifetime, reinforced by memory, identity, relationships, successes, failures, refuses to disappear quietly. It clings, even in its final moments, to the illusion that it must exist as someone. When the soul is drawn toward the luminous field of pure awareness, the radiant light that Tibetan teachings describe it senses the danger of dissolution. Approaching the light feels, paradoxically, like approaching death. The ego interprets this radiance as annihilation, because in that radiance, the separate I dissolves, and yet that very nothingness is not destruction but Buddha nature itself. It is the deepest layer of consciousness, the unconditioned essence that all beings share. In Buddhist thought, Buddha nature Tathagata Garbha is not a metaphysical gift. granted only to the enlightened, but an inherent potential within every living being. Humans, animals, even the seemingly inanimate structures of the world all are infused with this primordial capacity for awakening. Every being is, in its essence, already complete, already luminous, already whole. The work of spiritual practice is simply to remember this truth. This is why the encounter with the light at death is so significant. It is the moment when the soul comes face to face with what it has always been. But an unprepared, immature consciousness reacts poorly to this encounter. It mistakes the absence of form for extinction, the disappearance of identity for destruction, and the brilliance of Buddha nature for an overwhelming void. Unable to surrender, it turns away. Instead of stepping into the radiance, the soul flees into shadow, into the realm of confusion, fear, and illusion. In doing so, it steps away from liberation. This scene is not merely a description of what happens at death. It is a powerful metaphor for what happens every day of our lives. Whenever we face uncomfortable truths, in life as in death, attachment is the set of desires and beliefs we refuse to release. Confusion is the false worldview we construct to protect those attachments. Fear is the emotional resistance that arises whenever truth threatens to break our illusions. Thus, the light in the Tibetan Book of the Dead is not a mystical event reserved for the dying. It is a symbol of the truth that continually shines on all living beings, a truth we may approach or avoid at any moment. The courage to face this light is the same courage required to acknowledge our flaws, confront uncomfortable realities, and dissolve the illusions we construct to protect the ego. In Tibetan tradition, the first stage of death, Chikhai Bardo, the moment of dying, is the instant when the physical body ceases and consciousness detaches. In that fleeting moment, every being encounters the pure light of its true essence, the unconditioned illumination that has always been present. What happens next depends entirely on the soul's response. If the soul recognizes the light, if it sees this radiance not as a threat, but as its truest nature, then something extraordinary occurs. The soul is liberated. It enters directly into moksha, nirvana, or in Tibetan terms, odksal, the realm of clear light. Here, consciousness no longer wanders through the cycles of birth, death, and rebirth. It is no longer compelled by karma, desire, or attachment. It rests in pure awareness, infinite, boundless, serene. The Tibetan Book of the Dead calls this moment the return to the original nature. It is a homecoming, not a journey into nothingness, but a return to what has always been. In Buddhist philosophy, this state is not merely a reward or an escape. It is the natural resting ground of consciousness. Once all illusions have been burned away, enlightenment, therefore, is nothing added, nothing achieved. It is simply the stripping away of false identities, until only the truth remains. This light encountered at death is not absent from life. It is always present, shining through moments of deep stillness, profound insight, or moral clarity. When we release our attachments, even briefly, we feel this radiance. It appears as intuition, conscience, compassion, forgiveness, or sudden clarity. It is not the light of death, but the light that animates all of life. To recognize this light while still alive is to live with wisdom. It transforms death from something to fear into something to understand. It transforms life from a sequence of desires into a journey of awakening. In the next teaching, we will explore what happens when the soul turns away from the light, where it goes, what it encounters, and why it becomes trapped in the cycles of fear and illusion. If you wish to continue this journey of deep reflection, if you wish to keep this flame of wisdom alive, consider subscribing and giving this video a like. Your single gesture becomes a small lantern in the darkness, A light that might guide not only this life, but perhaps the next one as well.